All right, hello everyone. I have to apologize. There was an issue that my boss, the dean, needed me to help with, and so that's why we're starting a little bit late. Because like I said, he's my boss, so I got to talk to him. So a few announcements before we continue. Review quiz 10 is due by this Sunday, 11:59 p.m. Reading quiz 9 is due by Sunday, 11:59 p.m. So that reading quiz I delayed. Now it's going to be on. I delayed it a week. The exam will be a week from Wednesday, so a week from this Wednesday, not this Wednesday, a week from it. So we will have a review a week from today. Right, we'll have a review a week from today. I will give out a sheet, I believe, on Wednesday that gives the exact content, just like I did last time, and it also gives a list of possible essay questions. So I will give that out on Wednesday. We will probably get up, basically the exam will probably be on sections 5, 6, 7, and 8. We may start 9, but it probably won't be on the exam. But I won't know for certain until I see how far I get today. Right, so I'll give that exam content sheet on Wednesday. If you send me a question by 11:59 p.m. a week from today, so Monday, you'll get +4 bonus, just like last time, right? That opportunity will be available. And one thing I want to point out, some days you feel that you did a pretty good job lecturing, some days you feel like, oh, this didn't make a whole lot of sense. And part of it was just, I made a mistake on a couple of the video clips, they were a little bit longer and we didn't go as far as we needed to. And part of that was just me making a mistake. But I want to highlight 2 things that we have to understand that are very important about this period of history to help you better understand it. First is Chinese history is really, really complex in this time period. So think about this. If you've studied the American Civil War, you know how complex the American Civil War was. But that's just a civil war. The Chinese are fighting a civil war and a foreign invasion. So imagine how much more complex the history of the United States would be if, when trying to study the American Civil War, Britain also invaded us. Or Canada invaded us, right? We make it that much more complex. So that's part of it, is I have to talk about, I can't just say the Chinese government, because there's the nationalists, and then there's also the communists. And I got to tell their story, too, right? Because they win. Right? Communists will ultimately win. So that's part of the difficulty. Dylan, you had some.
So the American Civil War and the War of 1812 all rolled into one.
Yeah, exactly. No, okay. Yeah, that's a perfect parallel, Dylan. Thank you. So that's part of it. So I'm trying to struggle to do that, and that's not an easy thing to do. To make things even more complex, so when I teach Korean or Japanese history, there's a fairly agreed upon scholarly consensus about how history works, and about how that particular history works. Like it's pretty clear. There's not going to be a lot of arguments in the big story. It's not that way with Chinese history, right? It's not that way with Chinese history at all. There are very different stories, especially there's a very different difference between scholarly consensus about Chinese history in the West and the story told within the People's Republic of China. Very, very different stories. So, and I'm so glad you were able to join us in this class, Tianyu, because you helped us to see this. Remember I talked about this battle, Taiyuan. How do you pronounce this, Tianyu? Okay, so close enough. This is a big deal in Western textbooks. We talk about this. But it was interesting, you may note that when I asked Tianyu if he had heard of it, he conflated it with the 100 Regiments campaign, which was not the first victory. This is the first victory, but it was won by nationalist armies. So in the story that is told in the Western consensus, we tend to talk about this. We do talk about this too. We do mention this battle too, of course. But we also mention this one. But in the official history of the People's Republic of China, this isn't that big of a deal because the wrong people fought the battle. It was the nationalists, the people who were the enemy, the people who opposed the revolution. So it's the first battle that's won, but it doesn't count because it wasn't run by the correct group. So it doesn't occupy that big a picture in the story. Similarly, and I was glad it's good to have Freddie here representing England because, of course, the story here, the bombing of Chongqing, if this happened, this was the story that English people often talk about in World War II, is their own experience of bombing and being in the tubes, in the tunnels, and enduring that bombing, right? You probably have seen that keep calm and carry on sticker. That comes out of the bombing of London. And that's very important. But again, Tianyu had not heard of this. This is not important in the Chinese memory in the People's Republic of China because this was the nationalist capital. So that's one thing that makes this so complex, and I hope you'll bear with me. Sometimes, just frankly speaking, as a lecturer, I make mistakes. That's what we do sometimes. Most of the time, if it's me, perhaps. But also, there's a complexity here. The history itself is complex, and I have to present you both a Western consensus But also, I have to talk about what people in the People's Republic of China think, because if I don't, this history class won't be that useful to you in understanding the People's Republic of China. So I have to kind of do both. It makes it complex. So please bear with me. Ask questions when you feel that it would be helpful. And Chris, you had a question, so I should go ahead and take it now.
I just kind of noticed that it's kind of puts a new definition to the history is written by the victor.
Yeah, exactly. Right, and then other narratives are displaced, right? Yeah, exactly. And so that was a question, someone wrote some interesting papers about what happened to nationalist veterans in China, the people who had fought in the wrong army against the Japanese, right? They maybe were good soldiers who were fighting to protect China, but they were nationalists. So what happens to them? But a very good point. So any other questions before we jump back into things? Okay, if there was confusion last time, I'm going to kind of go back into it. So we talked about also, and I don't know if they mentioned this to you, I'm sure you spend a lot of time on this movie. You said, or on this battle. You said, you said the movie was good, and they talk a lot about this. As I said, we in the West tend to emphasize that the 100 Regiments campaign. The Chinese communists tend to focus on guerrilla combat. Right? Mao Zedong was a master of guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare has the advantage of you fight when the enemy is weak, so you're less likely to lose battles. That's the whole idea, one of the key points of guerrilla warfare. Against Mao Zedong's better judgment, right? He didn't want to do this, but other people wanted to. In 1940, the Chinese communists launched a conventional attack. So not guerrilla warfare, just straight out attack the Japanese, and they did win a victory. Like if you look at this, if you're a military historian, tactically speaking, they won a clear victory. Right? The Chinese communists win a clear victory. But what happens is the Japanese are going to react very strongly to this, and this leads to this along with the guerrilla warfare helps lead to the Three Alls campaign, the burn to ash campaign. So anytime you poke the Japanese army, they're going to punch you back. And the harder you poke them, the harder they're going to hit you. And so what happened was this devastated the communist army and the communist supporters when the Japanese struck back with this campaign. So the Chinese communists are going to switch back to their main strategy, use the war to expand their armies and influence while avoiding major confrontations with the Japanese. The nationalists want to do this too, but they can't because of their position. But we have to remember this, whenever the Chinese fight the Japanese, they always do so knowing that there will be another war after this one. Right? When the Americans, we fight World War II, we're thinking of one war, for the most part. Later we start worrying about the Soviet Union, but for the most part we're thinking of one war. Throughout the war, the communists and nationalists all know that they're going to fight again. And they fight the war thinking about that. How can we contribute to the war? How can we fight the Japanese without weakening ourselves too much? So I talked about, remember we watched the two video clips, we watched the video clip where we had Chinese villagers, and those were villagers who had lived in communist areas. Right? So they were the ones that were hit by the Japanese in response to communist attacks on the Japanese. So I want to stress that, right? Those were people, when the man was talking about his loved ones who had been killed, those were people killed in the Japanese response to communist attacks on the Japanese. So that's clear, right? So the point of that was I wanted to show now, there's this idea the Japanese want to break the Chinese will to fight. The Japanese army cannot get it through their heads, in a sense, that this is the new China. The Chinese aren't just going to simply roll over and give up. So they adopt a policy of, in a sense, brutality. Remember when I talked about the rape of Nanjing? So it's normal, or I shouldn't say normal, but it's often the case that armies will misbehave when they've taken the city, especially under those conditions. But remember, the rape of Nanjing didn't last a few days, it lasted for weeks. So that meant it was policy. So there's this attempt, remember we talked about Chongqing, the bombing of the capital to try and force the Chinese to give up, to break their will to fight. So I want to stress, that's the strategy that the Japanese government, or Japanese military is following. The Japanese government couldn't do much about it. But the Japanese military is following the strategy of let's crush the will of the Chinese people. So we talked about that in terms of the bombing of Chongqing. We talked about the rape of Nanjing. There's one more thing we have to talk about. I apologize, this is very terrible and uncomfortable, but you can't understand why the People's Republic of China acts in the way it does without understanding what we're going to talk about next. So as we play this clip, I want you to be able to identify what is Unit 731, what kinds of things does it do, and what sorts of weapons are being used here. oops, I already got it ready.
3-1 was staffed with the cream of the crop of Japanese scientists and research medics. The scientists turned the compound into a nightmare laboratory, using humans as test animals. Not only could all types of debilitating biological weapons be developed to use against Japan's enemies, advanced research into how to treat Japanese soldiers with such weapons, as well as conventional arms attacks, could be done. This process of dehumanization began with a twist of the language based on the lie told to mislead the local population into a false sense of security. This cover story stated that Unit 731 was a harmless lumber mill.
These scientists had a weird sense of humor. They referred to their victims as marutas, which is loosely translated as logs. And that's how they thought of them, as pieces of wood, not as things. You can carve them up, you can burn them in a fireplace for kids.
There was no shortage of this living wood for the construction of Shiroishi's dreams.
If they ran short of candidates, the secret police would just literally sweep the streets of the city and pick up enough candidates before they blew it.
He would then be placed on the one-way train line to Unit 731.
A train with 8 boxcars stopped. Soldiers opened the doors and removed what looked like straw mats wrapped in steel wires. I didn't know what was happening. And then I noticed arms sticking out, and heads moving, and blood coming out. And then the Japanese soldiers yelled logs, so I knew those were people.
The fate of these prisoners was ordained the moment they entered the compound. Not one survived.
We were testing the effectiveness of germs to determine how many people would be killed without giving a vaccine. In other prisoners, we injected vaccines and waited a while for antibodies to react. As we expected, those who did not get the vaccine got sick and died first. So we dissected them.
The best way, in the minds of the scientists, to observe the human body's defense system battling the invading pathogen was by performing live vivisection, rarely giving anesthesia.
I was ordered to wash that person's body with a deck brush before he or she was taken into the dissection room naked by a member of the special team. The first time I trembled. One team member was listening to the heartbeat using a stethoscope. One was standing holding a knife. The moment the stethoscope was removed from his ear, a knife went into the body. I did not know that according to doctors, this timing was very important, because if the timing was wrong, we could get blood all over us, and then we could get infected.
Not only were the prisoners deliberately infected with deadly diseases and dissected alive, they were also used for many more dramatic tests. 50 different lethal experiments, many thought up spontaneously and capriciously by Ishii and his staff.
This place was Unit 731's frostbite experiment lab, built in 1943. All year round, frostbite lab tests were conducted inside. What we still have today here is the base of the freezing machine, observation windows, etc. They had refrigerated chambers, and also in Manchuria, the winters are very severe, 40, 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, and they would expose prisoners from various parts of their bodies to these temperatures, freeze them, and then try various techniques to literally dehydrate them to see what was the most effective way of dealing with frostbite, so that that could be used in warfare as well, both to protect Japanese troops as well as to affect the enemy.
Some experiments were markedly more violent than others. To determine the best course of treatment of varying degrees of shrapnel wounds sustained in the field by Japanese soldiers, Chinese prisoners were exposed to direct bomb blasts. They were strapped, unprotected, to wooden planks staked in the ground at increasing distances around a bomb which was then detonated. Afterward, it was surgery for most, post-mortems for the rest.
People who were experimented on generally lasted 4 to 6 weeks, and then they were sacrificed. What is so heinous about this is that anyone was prey to these experiments. We're talking about men, women, children.
Bodies were disposed of in a crematorium, much like the ones that were working overtime 3,000 miles away in Nazi-occupied Europe.
Yeah, the parallel between Shiro Ishii and Dr. Josef Mengele, I think, is a very easy one to make, right? You have these kind of a mad scientist who's engaging in these kinds of so-called experiments. Yes, Dylan.
Why isn't this talked about more in the global scheme of things? Because, you know, we all grow up hearing about the Holocaust,
Mm-hmm.
but this honestly is the first time I've heard about it.
Well, I mean, the Holocaust was a much bigger event, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
but
about
this
6-7 million people.
This is just as worse.
Well, no, this did not kill 6 or 7 million people, so the amount of impact is different. And you know, when I teach world history, I talk about enough terrible stuff in World War II. You've been in my History 122 class, so I don't mention this. I do mention it in every Asian class, I believe, except for History of Korea. I don't mention History of Korea. I mention it in Modern East Asia and History of Japan. Because yeah, it's pretty terrible stuff. And there are parallels you can draw. It's just in terms of the amount of people who died, it's just not as significant, if that makes sense. And it doesn't have the same political impact. But yeah, good point. Right. I mean, it's a good parallel. Someone had over here? Yeah, Tyler, was it?
Yes. Well, for other experiments, I've also heard my uncle also brought a book home.
Right.
And I was like reading through it, and most of the experiments, I don't know if it was from the same group, but wasn't there also experiments on, I guess, like getting, people together to have like, to catch a disease sexually,
Right. Yeah.
and see the symptoms of
Yeah.
gonorrhea, chlamydia.
Yeah, no, they initially tried to, I mean, you raised it, so I'll fill in the details. Was initially they tried to force people, one of whom was, they would make sure someone was infected with a sexually transmitted disease. They would try and force them to have sex with someone else to give them the disease. They found out that didn't work very well because people, didn't want to do this. And then they switched to just giving injections. But yes, what you're saying is, my understanding is correct. So it's like mad science. I mean, oh my gosh, lots of questions. Why does everyone ask questions of the stuff I don't want to talk about? Ask me about Confucianism. I'll talk about Confucianisam all day. Sorry, Chris, there's another Chris back there. You guys hand it first.
Isn't 731 going after any specific minorities in China?
Oh, they were equal. They actually did this to some American prisoners as well as some Russians. Chinese were the major group. And as they point out, that if you were a prisoner, if you were AQ, a kind of loafer, vagrant, you could get picked up in a sweep, and this is what they would do. So any supply of human beings they would get, the majority, because they're located in Manchuria, were Chinese. But there were Americans who were treated.
So just
this way.
anybody who wouldn't be missed.
I'm sorry?
Anybody who
Yeah, anyone you can get away with, in a sense. Yeah, Chris?
In Japan today, how is Unit 731 viewed?
I mean, the Japanese people who know about it, mostly say it's terrible. I mean, it's no, I don't
I'm just
think there's.
asking.
I mean, for people who, and this isn't class of Japanese history, but if you're on the far right in Japan, you tend to say that World War II was a defensive war. The invasion of China was ultimately defensive, and that either this didn't happen or it was blown out of proportion. That's usually the response of the far right in Japan. But it's a tiny minority of people. Yeah, Aaron.
Were any of these individuals tried, or what's the...
Well, I'm glad you brought up that question, because that brings up what Dylan was saying earlier. Maybe one reason we don't talk about this much Shiro Ishii was, I believe, protected by General Douglas MacArthur, who hoped that we could use the data that he obtained to help protect Americans and for our own programs. So I think that's another reason, because we do not look good in this, right? Because we protected this guy. And it turned out, I want to stress, any of you that are like science majors, this is junk science. I mean, this, just like Josef Mengele, a lot of the experiments he did were just terrible in terms of, either morally terrible. They're also just terrible in terms of following correct scientific processes. But yeah, okay. Tyler.
Oh yeah, I mean I understand like that's horrible, but like some of the German scientists that did most of like tested like their experiments on like say like the Jews, most of those like that data was also used for us to actually land on the moon. So I mean.
Right, and it brings up a very complex moral issue because I think they call this in law the fruit of the poisonous tree. And I don't know, I can't say anything about the law or about the moon, but that's the moral issue as it raises. And of course, there's a difference between using the data and then letting the people off who got the data. So, yeah, I'll just take two more. Sorry, we have to go on. Yes, Armir and then Dylan.
I was asking for a clarification.
Right, sure.
From the video, they said 50 lethal experiments, but that's 50 lethal diseases that was?
I think it's different types.
Okay.
So it's not just that they only had 50 experiments. This was operating for a long time.
Okay.
And they had a lot. I mean, I don't know the numbers, but I think we're talking about thousands of people who go through this process. So it's a lot of people. Yes, Dylan, last question. Sorry.
Did anyone survive? Like, we know that there's people from the Holocaust that survived, but did any...
That's a good question. I mean, in terms of victims, I don't know. I can't answer the question. I'm sorry, I don't know. There may have been people that were liberated at the end, but like they said, they tend to get rid of the people. There are, though, I mean, people who were involved who have testified to this. Like there's guards and things who said, yeah, we did this. It was really bad. We shouldn't have done it, for the most part. Shiro Ishii, though, got off scot-free and died in his bed. So there you go. Though, interestingly, I will, as a curious, I don't know if I should say fun fact, he converted to Catholicism before he died, which I think is an interesting thing. And I can't figure out if he was really repentant or if he was just like, I want to have some questions to answer, so I'm going to try and cover my bases. I don't know. But it's kind of a curious thing. I'm like, there's not that many Catholics in Japan. How did he learn about Catholicism? It's just kind of curious. So just to kind of cover this, people clearly understood what this is. It's testing chemical and biological weapons and other data using prisoners. This is a Chinese history class, so we focus on the Chinese. And we had some Americans say they never heard of this. Tian Yu, have you heard of this before? How often do you hear about it, do you think?
They use the biology weapons.
Oh, no, I'm saying, when did you first learn about this? Was it in school?
High school.
Okay, high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you live in northern China, you go to the site. They have a museum there. But this is a big deal in the People's Republic's narrative. So all Chinese people know about this. Because, again, from their perspective, this is what happens when we're weak. People can come in and stomp on us. So we must be strong. And you got the weapons that are being used here. So I think we got that pretty well down. Well, it's just funny. Everyone has questions about things I don't want to talk about. But very good. So last time, we also talked about Yunnan. Right? We talked about the rectification campaigns. And I want to go back over that because we kind of went through it quickly. But first of all, I need to tell you where Yunnan is. Yunnan is in Shanxi province, up in here. And that's Yunnan, this little area here. So when I talk about Yunnan, I'm talking about a very small place. And it's in a part of China that's really hard to get to. And this is the perfect place to be safe because the Japanese are here, the nationalists are here. This is kind of like a no man's land. So this is a great place for the communists to have a base. It's pretty safe there because it's not in a nationalist-controlled area. It's not an area where the Japanese have a lot of control. Because of the geography, it's really hard to get there. So it's not really worth that much in economic terms. So it's a safe place to be. The nationalists don't want to send a lot of troops to try and capture it. The Japanese don't want to send a lot of troops to capture it. It's a safe place for the for the Chinese communists to recover. So I have a clip now about life in Yunnan, right? This is what we kind of skipped before to just talk about some things that were going on here. But I want you to catch what is attractive about this. Remember, one thing I tried to emphasize, key to why communism survives in China is that it was attractive. There were a lot of Chinese people who thought communism was a good idea. So what is attractive about this? What is Mao doing? What sort of reforms do they introduce? And how are these reforms different from what they had done earlier in Jiangxi? Right? How are they different? Remember the Jiangxi Soviet we talked about in the early 1930s. And this is a much nicer video than what we've been watching. Thank you, Dai.
Many other Chinese traveled to the northwest, to Yunnan, where the communists had set up their headquarters after the Long March. They came because they wanted to fight Japan, and because there was a sense here of building a new society. The atmosphere of these early days is remembered as one of enthusiasm and exuberance, the Yunnan spirit. Yunnan was still small enough that most people had contact with the leadership.
That's Mao.
Mao was developing some of his most important theoretical work. He was adapting Marxism to conditions in China. His theories were studied by all who came to Yunnan.
I went to the anti-Japanese university in Yunnan in the fall of 1938. We had classes on current affairs, philosophy, and so on. None of us minded the hard conditions. At night, we shared huge beds. Each person had just this little space, about a foot, one next to the other.
Basketball hoop?
We got up early in the morning. We did morning drill and we learned how to use weapons to fight the Japanese. The term was only a few months long. Then we would be sent to the front and we sang a song.
From Yunnan, the young people were sent to work in villages throughout North China and Manchuria. They recruited anyone who would resist Japan. They also changed the face of North China by initiating moderate reforms, reducing land rent and taxes. They held elections and introduced voting. The communists carefully built rural middle-class support, and they avoided the violent class struggle they had used in the past.
Woman up. Our slogan was, if you have money, give money. If you have a gun, give your gun. And if you are healthy, come and fight. We didn't attack the rich. We even allied with landlords as long as they were not collaborators and wanted to resist.
I am from a rich farming family. When the party started in our area, why did they come to us, who were upper class? Because the poor peasants couldn't afford to give up their work in the fields. Besides, they were not necessarily more progressive than we were.
Okay, so look at this, and like I said, there's something I want to make sure we have time to do, so I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit quickly. But there's a lot attractive about Yunnan. It's a small movement that's promising to build a new society. Right? There's this idea, you kind of think about it this way, like if you study 1960s American history, like there's all these like hippie communes, like people coming together to try and make a new like way of living. That's what this promises. But the crisis is really bad, right? We're really in trouble here. And here's a safe place we can go to try and figure out how to build a new China. So this is very, very attractive. And I thought it was interesting, did you catch, what was the name of the university that they attended there? Anti-Japanese University. Notice, it wasn't the Marx University, wasn't the Communist University, right? It's this idea, come here, build a new China, fight Japan. That's what we're doing, right? That's what we're doing here. Mao, as we mentioned earlier, he's thinking about his ideas. We'll talk more about that later, but he's got kind of a break, a space to think through what this new China will look like and what needs to be done to bring it there. And they introduce reforms, right? Notice they come in and they reduce taxes. They reduce rents. Right? They reduce taxes, they reduce rents, which are generally are popular and don't arouse that much opposition. So the reforms they're undertaking are much more moderate than in Jiangxi. Remember, in Jiangxi province, they encouraged class conflict, and they seized land from the landlords and the rich peasants. But here, they don't do that. they follow moderate reform to gain the support of the rich peasants and landlords. Why? Why is their support necessary?
Because poor peasants don't have the money to support the fight.
Right, if you have exactly. If you have weapons, give us weapons. If you have people, give us people. Well, I'm a poor peasant family. I can't spare my son to join the army. He needs to stay here and work. I'm a landlord. I got some spare sons. I can send one. I've got guns. I can send them. You know, I'm not. I know it sounds like spare sons, but yeah. But they're engaged in this kind of moderate reform to build a strong base to fight Japan. Now, it's a call to fight Japan. They're not going to send a conventional army. These are people trained to fight guerrilla style. They don't want to risk everything against the Japanese. They don't want to make the Japanese so angry they come in and destroy Yunnan. So they still have that strategy here, but I want to stress they're building up broad support by engaging only in moderate popular reforms. But they did not give up their vision of radical reform. They're just holding off on it for now because it would be a bad idea. And we talked about earlier how you have during this time period what's called the rectification campaign, where this, and this is going on in Yunnan, where the party under Mao is going to focus on internal discipline, education, and rectifying thought. Remember, that means making sure that you think in terms of party orthodoxy, which is Mao's thought. Right? Mao determines what orthodoxy is. And I just noticed this, and I hope our art majors, I hope you'll be proud of me, because I just realized this, and I've never noticed this before. Notice there's Mao speaking, there's Marx, there's Lenin, there's Mao. Right? Thank you, Madison, I appreciate the nod. That means I've gotten approval from the art major. So, by the way, I almost didn't get an academic diploma in high school because I couldn't pass art with a high enough grade. And I went to talk to my teacher, my artwork was terrible, so she thought I was lazy. And I'm like, can I do anything to raise my grade? She said, okay, you can come after school and do these extra projects. That's a big sacrifice, right? Staying after school to work. And then she had time to watch me, and she realized, he's not lazy, he's just untalented. And based on that, she let me have enough bonus to get my B, because she realized that I really was trying, I just have no talent. So I became a historian, 7 marks. But the key thing here, Mao is being presented as the one who will interpret Orthodox communism for China. And officially, what will be known, this will be known as Marxist, Leninist, Maoist thought. I think now, correct me if I'm wrong, Tianyu, isn't it? It's Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, Deng Xiaoping thought.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So that's the line of Orthodox thinkers in China. And you can see it here, it's just, Deng Xiaoping isn't the leader yet, so he'll be here. Mao's own thought will become orthodoxy. It's in part of the CCP Constitution. It still is to this day. 2012 Constitution, it's still there. We'll look at that later. And we talked about how there's one way that they try and deal with this, one way they try and develop this kind of, how do you make people orthodox? How do you rectify thought? We talked about how they have study sessions. People study Mao and his thought, and they reflect on their own lives, and they engage in self-criticism. And you do this publicly, like you would get up in front of this class and criticize yourself. And if we think your criticism is good enough, you're accepted, everything's fine, you've rectified your thought. If it's not good enough, we may ostracize you. No one may talk to you until you have a proper confession, then you can be brought back in. For people who don't want to go along, who are seen deemed a threat, that's when you may have some torture and executions. Now again, I want to stress, the nationalists did that too, right? So I'm not trying to pick on the communists by noting that, right? The nationalists were doing that sort of thing too. Yes, Amir.
Was there like a certain amount of times or tries they had to rectify?
I'm not sure. I think if you tried, you were given as long as you needed. Like the idea was not to find people and kill them. The idea was to get people thinking properly, if that makes sense. So if you were sincerely trying and weren't seen as a threat, I think you were given as long as you needed. And eventually you would get it right and you would be accepted. So we talked briefly about Dingling. Remember, she was a writer who was part of this May 4th movement, which was considered very individualistic. She wrote this very depressing, cynical works. And her husband was killed by the nationalists, right? So I want to stress that the nationalists are doing this kind of stuff too. He's killed by the nationalists. She becomes interested in communism and goes to Yunnan. But there she is critical of the party, right? We talked about that, and is forced to engage in a self-criticism. And I wanted to give you a little bit more flesh to this, to give you a kind of understanding. So I went to our old friend Wikipedia. Wikipedia is awesome, by the way. And so this, I wanted to share with you what Wikipedia said about Dingling. Dingling struggled with the idea that revolutionary needs defined by the party should come before art. I know a lot of you are art majors or you have literary interests. And so she wanted her art to come first. She objected to the gender standards at work in Yunnan. In 1942, she wrote an article in a party newspaper titled Thoughts on March 8th, questioning the party's commitment to change popular attitudes towards women. She satirized male double standards concerning women, saying they were ridiculed if they focused on household duties, but also became the target of gossip and rumors if they remained unmarried or worked in the public sphere. She also criticized male cadres are like officials, for our purposes, use of divorce provisions to rid themselves of unwanted wives. Her article was condemned by Mao Zedong and the party leadership, and she was forced to retract her views and undergo a public self-confession. Right? So she went through this process. But here's the key point. This goes maybe to what Armir was saying. Her main work in these years was the novel The Sun Shines Over Sangam River, which she completed in 1948. So she doesn't go to jail for this. Right? She's not punished for this. It followed the complex revolts of land reform in a rural village. It was awarded the Stalin Prize for Literature. You don't get a higher prize than the Stalin Prize, right? Stalin won't allow that. In 1951, it is considered one of the best examples of socialist realist fiction. It did not, however, address gender issues. So she rectified her thought. She wrote what was permissible by the party and was rewarded for doing so, but she had to drop something that was important to her. And that gives you, I think, kind of a sense of how these things are working. Okay. And we talked about Wang Shiwei. I won't go too much into detail about this, except because we did last time, except to note he refused to back off, so he was executed. He was actually killed. But it still took them until after World War II to actually kill the guy. So there was even still a question there. And like I said, especially if you're from an American perspective, you're like, this is terrible. My job is not to defend the morality of things. My job is to explain why things are the way they are. Mao had experienced what happens when communists were divided. That led to remember the Jiangxi Soviet, that helped lead to its failure. There was fighting among communists, a lot of people died. He had seen what happened when the leadership didn't think correctly. Remember that led the Chinese who were influenced by the Soviets to lead, and that did not work out well. They followed bad tactics. Mao was consistently right, where other people have been wrong. So he said, look, we have to be united around me because I know what I'm doing. And as we'll see, Mao knew what he was doing. Right? So if Mao was here today, I think that's how he would defend it. He would say, look, the movement would have been destroyed. I had to do what I had to do. We won. And we built a new China. That's how he would respond, I think. Okay. Whew. Now I can finally wanted to do something other than me just talking to you, because that probably is not the most exciting thing to hear constantly. So I'm going to pass out some images, right? I know a lot of people are either artists here or interested in visual materials. So remember, I said that part of Japan's strategy was to destroy the Chinese will to fight. So Chinese had to encourage themselves to keep fighting. And art was one way they tried to do that. So I'm going to pass out some examples of Chinese comic art from this time period. And as you look at these, I want you to talk with people in your groups about how would this image help the war effort? How would this inspire Chinese to keep fighting? So let's see. So if you three could form a group. Here. And please do take off the paper clip and share the images. Interesting for all of you. Okay, now it's Chris and Jennifer, Emily, and Brandon.
So it's a poor peasant family that's off the revenge, running from the Japanese bombing.
Is this the one
They're running somewhere. But basically, their idea was let's run away and survive now, but we won't forget what they did for us. What they did to us. We will survive. We will come back even stronger, and we will cut the throats of our enemies.
So you can see it in his eyes. He doesn't look scared.
He looks angry.
He looks angry. He looks like he's ready for vengeance. Or revenge.
Living for vengeance. We'll run away today, but tomorrow we will have our first of blood.
The question was,
Image-wise, it's gonna have to do with like having this mom figure looking up the sky really mad at the Japanese plane. Yeah, with their facial fear, but she's like, oh boy.
Okay, take just another few seconds.
It's supposed to draw sympathy.
I think here's a very more straightforward. So there's some Chinese. This means common people? Yeah.
I heard normal people. Well, here's so many things.
It's the same. Literally, it means, literally this means normal. But it can mean ordinary.
I want to say it'll create unity because now it's like,
yeah, we use kamikaze.
I just said fire pilots. I don't know.
Yeah, no, well, kamikaze is suicide pilots. I
Like mother figure trying to protect her children, so that whole idea of protecting future protect, it goes back to like protecting China.
Yeah, that's a lane. Yeah, he's not late. Okay. All right, excellent. So let's. You can see also, you get some ideas from looking at your individual one. It helps us if we share them with each other. So this is, I think, the most obvious one in terms. So, Carrie, can you tell us how's this going to encourage us to fight?
The head means like the license on flag which Japan used during the World War or like colonial period.
So yeah.
And the monkey means like when people like especially Chinese and Korean are offending,
Attacking? Oh, insult?
when they're, yeah, this.
They want to insult someone, yeah.
Insert way of like,
Yokada.
So you've heard
Okay, yeah, it's not insult.
Yeah, in monkey they describe like as monkey to insert Japanese, and also the monkey is like grabbing a person's body part.
Right.
Like it means the human experiment, and the word is Pyongmin, but can you pronounce in Chinese?
Pigmen. It means ordinary people. So these people are labeled as ordinary people. So how's that going to encourage people to fight?
I think it instills like this sense of, well, not really anger, but anger.
Yeah.
So like we're getting literally stepped on.
Right. If we ordinary people don't do something, this is what's going to happen to us. Remember we talked about one problem? And I think Cameron maybe brought this up in an earlier lecture. You know, Chinese people often lack nationalism. What our government does is separate from what we do. And Cameron had said, did the war help create nationalism? It's like, yes, it did. Because if we, the common people, don't fight back, this is what's going to happen to us. So what happens to our country directly impacts us. So we have to fight back. Otherwise, this kind of terrible thing will happen to us. Now, it's interesting you mentioned monkeys as like an insult, because there's a contrasting image. So let me skip ahead. Here we are. Here's more monkeys. So what's going on in this one? Here we got more monkeys.
Basically, it's like these family members. We're saying that this one looks more like a female, a mother.
Yeah, that's the mom.
Protecting her children, but while the oldest child is scared and the younger child is crying, she's thinking, let's run away now, but later on we will come back even stronger.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's like living for revenge. So while we are weak now, there will come a day when we are strong and we will defeat you. Never forget what the Japanese have done to us.
Right, exactly. And I want to highlight this because Daya had pointed this out. Here, you've got planes, and once again, here you also have planes. So there's this kind of bombing has really made an impact on the Chinese psyche. You know, where this is really something terrible that's happening to us, and we're going to get vengeance eventually. But I thought it was interesting. Yeah, monkeys can be used negatively. They can also be used positively in a sense, because I think that makes us feel more. They're kind of cute, the characters, so we feel more sympathy with them, perhaps. Now, again, to make things really complex, these are just flat out really, really in a sense, brutally anti-Japanese pictures. Let's have a look at this one. What's going on here?
Okay, I can speak about it.
All right, Derek, go for it.
So, the little warlord guy, I think it was supposed to influence Chinese people to fight because it's like, the don't supposed to represent Japanese people.
Right, yeah, this
What
is the
they're trying
Japanese
to say
people.
is, we don't want to be taken over by Japan because they're at least don't care about the people in general. They care more about power.
Yeah, and exactly, I almost wonder if this was a socialist or communist perspective, because it's saying that, the Japanese people are victims too. And I want to stress there's different ways to say people in Asian languages, like some are insulting and some aren't. And the word here used to describe Chinese people is the same word being used to describe Japanese people. So they're people too. So I thought this was interesting, right? You've got, and this says like the kind of the war machine, the burden on the Japanese people is too heavy. And we shouldn't be angry necessarily at Japanese people. We should be angry at the people who are leading them this way. And we can beat these guys because even the Japanese people don't like them. So a very different one. One more, and then we'll be done. I want to give you, I don't want to end on an image like that. This is my favorite, I think. Who had this one? Okay, so what's going on here?
I'll take a shot. So like when he was saying, to grab the bombs, I was kind of like looking at it as kind of like, we want you to fight to protect the ones that are about to get bombed, and you're kind of like the intervention between the bombs and the people.
Right.
So it's kind of like, you need to fight.
There's still this idea, I want to do something, right? And I think especially, I'm no artist, this angel missed. I feel bad for these people because the angel totally missed, right? If you look at what's going on. But I think the key point is actually this part, Chinese people are worth saving, right? You look at these people, especially, I feel so bad when I look at this, right? Like, especially as a father, like, I've done this before, like, you're trying to get your kid out of a dangerous situation, they fall over, it's like, good Lord, am I in a horror movie? What's going on here? And so you think these people need to be saved. I need to do something to protect our Chinese people. And I especially just like this image because it emphasizes, it's not like, in a sense, anti-Japanese, it's more just pro-Chinese. We'll finish up those images on Wednesday and continue on with section 9. Might get to section 8, might get section 9, I don't know. Actually, I should just leave it on that image because that's a great image. No, the images are yours to keep, to treasure as a memorial of our time together. Share them with your friends and family.